Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Later in the programme, we'll be speaking to the Israeli Education Minister about what happens next in the region. That's after 8:30. Now, there appear to be yet more divisions in the Conservative Party about Brexit, with the Foreign Secretary Boris Johnson saying the Prime Minister's customs plan is crazy. Number 10 didn't rebuke him publicly, but some of his parliamentary colleagues did, accusing him of an extraordinary burst of misbehaviour. But it isn't just the customs plans causing Brexit pain for Theresa May. She's also been defeated again in the House of Lords. Our political editor, Faisal Islam, reports.
In Westminster, the Boris watchers think they know exactly where the Foreign Secretary is on manoeuvres.
Is Boris causing problems?
Yes, the Foreign Secretary most certainly is, for an exasperated Prime Minister facing not just highly public criticism of her #1 Brexit customs plan, but the stirrings of a political rival who calls her plan crazy on the front page of a newspaper.
Is the Prime Minister botching Brexit, Mr Johnson?
On his way into Cabinet, no explanation from Boris Johnson for his lack of diplomacy about Cabinet discussions as the government heads for a new Brexit negotiation cliff. Number 10 said the PM had full confidence in the Foreign Secretary, who spoke to Sky News in Washington.
If you don't get the deal you want on customs union, will you resign?
Well, the Prime Minister has made it very clear where, as she said in her Mansion House speech, we're coming out of the customs union, we're coming out of the single market.
But where Boris ends up on all this really does matter. Downing Street also pointed out that Mr Johnson had signed up to both customs options in the Mansion House speech. Some former Tory ministers were withering.
The first thing I can't get my head around is that a very, very senior cabinet minister, a really senior cabinet, top three cabinet minister, is calling out his own Prime Minister in public. I'm sure cabinet ministers have robust discussions behind closed doors about the right policy, but they tend to keep stum in public. So I've no idea why Boris isn't doing his job as Foreign Secretary and perhaps getting President Trump over the line on an Iran deal.
It's discourteous. There's a central principle of government that you have collective responsibility. The arithmetic of all this strongly suggests to me that he will not be able to deliver on the vision of Brexit, which he is currently pushing forward.
So what's he doing?
I don't know. You have to ask him.
But Boris backing Brexiters said it was only fair.
Greg Clark went out on Sunday and you could argue stirred up the pot about, the threats and the problems over job losses. So I don't think anyone causes more trouble than the other.
Some frustrated Conservative MPs say they know exactly where Boris Johnson is and what he's doing in extraordinarily publicly confronting the Prime Minister, calling her preferred customs plan crazy. But they say that she can override the objections of the Foreign Secretary by throwing this decision to a full meeting of Cabinet next week. But if that happens, fans of the Foreign Secretary say it could precipitate a leadership challenge. And if that was not enough constitutional pickle,
So the contents had it.
2 more Brexit defeats for the government in the House of Lords on membership of EU agencies and stripping out the PM's much-vaunted exit date of March 2019. With the Foreign Secretary on manoeuvres, multiple battles on multiple fronts and time running out for a deal. Faisal Islam, Sky News.
Well, our chief political correspondent John Craig joins me now. Another defeat for the government in the House of Lords.
A hat-trick of government defeats.
Not one to celebrate.
I'm not celebrating, no, I'm just excited, because I'll tell you why. Because the first 2 that Faisal mentioned we were expecting, because they were Labour and cross-party amendments. But the third one they've just suffered in the last few minutes is all about keeping Britain in the European Economic Area. Government won't like that. We were not expecting, because both the Conservative front bench and the Labour front bench were opposed to that. But Remainers on both sides have clearly piled into the content lobby, as they call it in the Lords. You could see them, lots of them. Peter Mandelson and co on the Labour side, Lord Patten and co on the Tory side. That voting on that one with 27 majority, bigger majorities on the others. So real trouble in the Lords.
And still lots of controversy bubbling up about the Prime Minister's option on the customs union.
Yes, indeed. I mean, that's obviously going to come up at a Cabinet subcommittee later this week, although are they going to defer a decision again? We think they might do till next week. Boris Johnson, of course, has stirred it up again. Question is, has she got the numbers? There's all sorts of talk about arm-twisting the Defence Secretary, Gavin Williamson. Wobbly Williamson, he's being called now. So that battle is still to be fought. So that battle in the Cabinet and then more trouble in the Lords.
Pfizer was suggesting that perhaps this could lead to a leadership challenge. Would you agree?
I think there are those who would like that to happen. Certainly there was an interesting interview with Jacob Rees-Mogg in the Daily Telegraph this morning. Now, he's touted as a future leader by some Conservative activists. He was being very complimentary about Boris Johnson. And yes, Boris has his big supporters in Parliament. But Jacob Rees-Mogg said Boris Johnson would be a tougher negotiator in Brussels than the Prime Minister.
Interesting. Watch this space. Much happening, much happening. Thank you very much, John.
Now, in the House of Lords tonight, the government has suffered yet another defeat, the 14th so far, over its Brexit legislation. By a majority of 27, peers backed retaining key aspects of the single market through continued participation in the European Economic Area, and that decision taken in defiance of both the Conservative and Labour frontbenches. Well, earlier today, the Foreign Secretary Boris Johnson dismissed one of Theresa May's proposals for handling customs duties after Brexit as crazy. His remarks were directed at the idea of a so-called customs partnership where the UK would be responsible for collecting some duties on behalf of the EU. Our Deputy Political Editor, John Pienaar, has the latest.
Is that Boris Johnson? What did he call the Brexit plan? The one Theresa May supports? Crazy? Surely not.
If the Brexit plan is that crazy, are you ready to resign?
How are you? How are you, he said. Fine. Can't say the same for him or the Cabinet.
Sir, is the government's customs partnership a crazy idea?
Good morning. Word is, the Brexit Secretary's not keen on the PM's choice of plan either. Thinks it's too complex. The buck stops here. The Prime Minister has to get a plan and her divided Cabinet together. So what are the customs options? The Brexiteers' favourite is a sharp break and use new technology to avoid stops at the border. And Mrs May's, a customs partnership. Britain collects customs duties, passes on some cash to the EU and refunds traders when there's a cheaper British trade deal. So no blockages and no hard border with Ireland. In today's Daily Mail, Mrs May's favourite paper, Boris Johnson called that idea crazy, tied to the EU. Could you ever support a plan you call crazy? So now the Prime Minister must win the argument, somehow convince colleagues like the Home Secretary she's just promoted, or maybe her ally, the Defence Secretary if she can, or repackage the plan. No one's sure how to pull it off, ministers least of all. In a word, do you think there can be any kind of compromise on customs? Don't sound too confident. There'll be a fight here, whatever's agreed. Brexiteer MPs seem immovable.
I think they would be seriously certifiable if they go for the idea of the customs partnership. It really would run against everything I know about government.
MPs doubtful about Brexit want to steer a course close to the EU for the sake of British business.
Ultimately, it's about getting the right deal in the national interest, something that means that we don't go backwards in Northern Ireland, but also that our manufacturers are able to conduct trade across borders without unnecessary barriers.
Tonight, there are signs Boris Johnson may rather stay and fight for his vision of trade after Brexit inside the Cabinet. But Brexiteers won't like any customs compromise. There's still a chance that Parliament may demand Britain stays inside the EU customs system, and Brussels may just throw out the whole idea. Brexit was always likely to lead to trouble in the Cabinet, in Parliament and in Brussels. Theresa May surely can't have imagined it would be quite this tough. John Pienaar, BBC News, Westminster.
All for one and one for all. Perhaps Boris Johnson didn't get round to reading The Three Musketeers at Eton. The Foreign Secretary, far from embracing collective cabinet responsibility, has happily brandished a rapier and shredded Theresa May's proposals for a customs partnership, thus undermining her yet again. Clearly, he believes he can act with impunity, and he's probably right. aided by the change in the delicate balance of the cabinet last week with Amber Rudd out and Sajid Javid in. After his branding of the proposals as crazy in a carefully timed interview with the Daily Mail today, Mr Johnson apparently got through cabinet unscathed, with Downing Street declaring that the Prime Minister had full confidence in Boris. But did she have her fingers crossed behind her back? I'm joined by our political editor, Nick Watton. Nick, hello. First of all, what can Theresa May do?
Well, Theresa May's view is she's got to resolve this issue within her cabinet very, very soon so that she can influence the findings of the European Council that will take place in Brussels at the end of June. But she does want to work by consensus. She wants as many members of that Brexit cabinet subcommittee on her side, agreeing with her. She wants all of them, although she might not get all of them. Now, I was speaking to one Brexit cabinet minister this evening who says that they are very confident that they've killed off the customs partnership. This was the one that Boris Johnson was criticising. Think they can win on the so-called maximum facilitation idea, which is basically use technology to deal with the border, talking about going back to Brussels and saying, look, we've got your concerns and can we address them? But interestingly, I spoke to some Remain members of the cabinet and they sound relatively relaxed at the moment. They're saying, look, it's not necessarily a binary choice between these two options on the table. You could perhaps have elements of both of them.
So we're all hearing there's going to be a showdown, though.
Well, if the Prime Minister were to go for her then preferred option, the customs partnership, then Boris Johnson would, as one ally said to me, flounce out of the cabinet. But it looks like some Remain supporting Tories are really up for a fight. Now, there's been a lot of talk that Parliament as a whole favours more of a gentle Brexit and the Conservative Eurosceptics are not wholly representative of Parliament. Now, those Remain supporters are going to have an opportunity in the next month to have a vote when the EU withdrawal bill comes back from the House of Lords. Now, this evening, peers voted to keep the UK in the European Economic Area, which essentially means remaining in the single market. Now, when that comes and the government tries to overturn that in the House of Commons, if the Labour front bench decides it agrees with that, which it doesn't at the moment, then all those Tory Remainers need to do, all the Ken Clarks of this world need to do, is not turn up, and the government could be in trouble. And also, Ken Clarke and his supporters are planning to amend a later bill to keep the UK in a customs union. Well, they could take the bill as amended by the Lords that has a very mild amendment on the customs union, and he could put his own version and see whether he could get MPs to vote for that.
Thank you very much, Nick. Will we indeed have Ken Clarke here, the passionate Remainer, former Chancellor and the Conservatives' longest-serving MP. Good evening to you.
Evening.
We're going to come to the machinations of these votes in a moment. Let's just talk firstly about Boris. What will it take for Boris to get sacked?
Well, normally he would have been sacked. It's totally irresponsible because a strong government works by having candid discussions inside cabinet committees. You try to reach a compromise if you're a big division as there is here, and then you stick by the agreed policy. And they've already agreed this policy once, the outlines of it. But he, quite irresponsibly, keeps undermining the Prime Minister's efforts to get an answer. And she doesn't have a security enough majority to sack him. I personally think that she'd be much better off if he flounced out, because it would complete his rather extraordinary performance as Foreign Secretary.
But have you, in your long history at Westminster, ever seen this level of insubordination in Cabinet go unpunished?
No. Every time they try to discuss the subject, a running commentary is given by Boris or the other Brexiteers all the time, biased against the general consensus view the Prime Minister is trying to get. You can't run a government like that, particularly one that has a parliamentary majority that is clearly against Boris Johnson's preference.
But it looks so clearly like it's undermining Theresa May. You called her what was a difficult woman. Maybe she should be more difficult. I mean, should she sack him?
Well, she's got to reach a decision.
Yeah.
Time is being wasted. We've spent 2 years getting here. We can't negotiate anything with the other Europeans because they're waiting for the government to decide what its policy is, what it is trying to negotiate. And the key aim, the public are getting completely bewildered and baffled and driven up the wall by this, and a lot of it seems detail. But actually, if you put new barriers on our borders, if you have tariffs, customs processes, lorry parks, queues on the motorways, you raise costs, you'll damage our economy for years. This is a very important decision. It needs to be taken seriously, not in these
but if he's
Donald
standing in the way,
Trump-like remarks
if he's
that
standing in
Boris
the way,
keeps
should he
making.
just be sacked?
Well, that would no doubt reinforce and give a sense of injury to these Brexiteers. I think he's going to have to make his mind up when the Cabinet as a whole agrees on the most sensible arrangement they can get to make sure we have an open border in Ireland and we don't have new barriers to our trade and investment. Then Boris really make his mind up whether he's a minister or not, or whether he wants to go about and keep campaigning for the leadership for the backbenchers.
Let's deal with these amendments now. You have an amendment in the trade bill on the customs union, but it looks like the trade bill being knocked back to the autumn. But there is a way.
There's Lord's amendments as well, yes.
Yes, there's a way next month where you could strengthen that customs union amendment in there. That presumably is what you do.
There's a clear majority in the House of Commons across party because both parties are hopelessly divided. That's what makes Europe such a destructive issue in all these debates. But across party, there's a large majority for not putting barriers to our trade and investment, not barring ourselves from the most important market we have in the world, which is what it's going to remain.
But it was, leaving the customs union, to be fair, was in the 2017 manifesto which you campaigned on.
I didn't campaign on it. It appeared halfway through the election. Nobody sent me a copy. I've never read it. Neither have they. Let us not have a post-mortem on the general election campaign, or else you'll get me going on other things. No, what matters, why this is important, is this will decide how successful the British economy is for the next generation or two. The younger generation will be poorer than they otherwise would be, probably in any event, as we leave. They'll be made much poorer than they otherwise would be if we have a hopeless set of new barriers.
But if you had to get your way on the customs union and other things, and of course we've just heard what Nick said about the European Economic Area, would you act, if you could, to support your view, even if it meant bringing Theresa May down?
It wouldn't bring Theresa May down. It would actually
she's made it clear it's a question of confidence.
No, she hasn't made it. Because that was, again, what the Brexiteers tried to say it was going to be. She said it would not be a matter of... She's been defeated once, or the government's been defeated once, when they tried to stop Parliament having a vote on the outcome.
Do you want her defeated in the customs
The next day, nobody called for her. It's laughable. It's more Brexiteer nonsense. The Prime Minister would be strengthened if we sorted out these wild right-wing people and actually got the Cabinet to come forward with a solution which matches the majority in Parliament. And already the government has committed itself to no physical infrastructure in Ireland, regulatory convergence if necessary, and we don't want new barriers to trade.
I'm going to have to stop you there, Ken Clark.
Thank
you very much
to our
indeed.
economy.
Thank you very much indeed.